The deadline was already over. On Sara Whitmore's first morning as acting lead, the project board greeted her with a date that made no sense. Monday, 9 a.m. already passed. The task sat under her name anyway, bright and urgent, as if reality could be overwritten by a label. Sara did not panic. That was never her style. At 28, she carried the reputation of a former academic prodigy who seemed to exhale competence, fast comprehension, clean execution, and a calm that made chaos look smaller. In the office, even her presence signaled control. Copper red hair pinned neatly back, posture steady, eyes that held on a detail until it confessed. The board did not confess. It tried to distract, but the gray metadata line did, created 2 weeks earlier. The deadline hadn't become late because Sara arrived late. It had been late before Sara ever touched it. A screenshot went into a plain folder named Notes. Then another. Then the ticket history opened, and the activity log revealed an edit at 11:58 p.m. the night before. That timestamp changed everything. Someone had worked late, and it wasn't to fix the project. It was to fix the story. Microsoft Teams lit up. Jason Reed, morning. Quick sync at 10. Jason Reed, big week. But Sara has this. The words were supportive on the surface, almost warm. Underneath, they set a frame. Pressure had arrived, and Sara had agreed to carry it. Sara opened the Jira issue and scrolled slower than necessary, as if patience could calm the page. The top looked normal. A title, a label, and a signee. The bottom told the truth. A chain of tiny edits, like fingerprints. An SLA field changed. A priority tag flipped from medium to critical. A linked ticket appeared, then disappeared, leaving a broken reference. None of it was loud. None of it was a single smoking gun. It was worse than that. Quiet alterations that created a future argument. If someone asked later why the deadline was missed, the board would answer in the cleanest voice possible. Sara. Sara didn't let the board speak alone. Another screenshot went into Notes. The meeting invite waited on the calendar. Project Rescue. The timestamp on the invite was older than Sara's promotion email. Then came another small tell. On the attendee list, everyone with power was marked required. Sara was marked optional. At 10 o'clock, the glass conference room filled with familiar faces and unfamiliar stillness. Jason sat back like the room belonged to him. A slide deck glowed on the wall, already open, already positioned like evidence. Jason clicked to a slide titled Current State. Missed deadline. Client escalation. Risk to renewal. Jason spoke smoothly. Sara is taking point on Willow now. A miracle is needed by Friday. The sentence was built to corner. If Sara argued, Sara sounded defensive. If Sara accepted, Sara owned the mess. Sara chose a third option, composure with verification. Sara nodded once. A summary is possible. Verification is required. The room heard the word required, and the silence shifted. Jason's smile flickered like a light bulb fighting its last seconds. As people talked, Sara watched the details that mattered more than tone. Who avoided eye contact, who looked relieved when someone else spoke, who acted like the ending had already been decided. A senior engineer said handoff twice in the same minute, like repetition could make it real. An account lead stared at the table, as if the grain pattern mattered more than the slide. Someone from finance asked one question, and then went quiet, like the question had already been answered somewhere else. Sara wrote down 3 phrases in a plain notebook, not because the phrases were clever, but because they were telling. Taking point. Rescue. Miracle. Those were not project words. Those were narrative words. When the meeting ended, Sara stayed seated just long enough to open the deck and click version history. Edit at 11:58 p.m. And a common thread in faint gray. Legacy issue. Do not mention. That label was not about efficiency. It was about obedience. Back at the desk, Sara rebuilt the week like a timeline in a case file, created date, due date, assignment date, editor names. The editor on the late-night change wasn't Jason. It was someone in accounts, someone who had no business touching task-level details. Sara opened Microsoft Teams again and searched the project channel for a phrase that kept showing up. Per client. There were messages from last month. Per client, SLA needs to reflect new scope. Per client, timeline should stay aggressive. Per client, comms should stay consistent. But there was no message from the client in the thread. No forwarded email. No attachment. Just per client, used like a shield. That was another fingerprint. When people lied politely, per client was a convenient mask. Sara clicked into the account channel and searched for the client's name, then for the email subject that should have existed if per client were real. Nothing. The closest thing was a cropped screenshot someone had dropped into chat weeks ago. No sender line, no date header, no thread context, just a rectangle of words floating without origin. Sara saved the message link anyway. A floating rectangle was still a clue because it meant someone had wanted the idea of proof without the burden of proof. In Jira, Sara opened the SLA field history and watched it change like a heartbeat on a monitor, a value adjusted by minutes here, by hours there, always late at night, always just enough to make the current team look late and the previous decision look reasonable. The same account lead name appeared again. Sara exported the audit log, then saved it twice, once as a PDF, once as raw text, because systems like to simplify history after problems became public. The strangest part wasn't the sabotage. The strangest part was how politely it was done. No insults, no threats, no obvious cruelty. Just clean edits, soft language, and deadlines that arrived like verdicts. Sara felt anger try to rise again, but it didn't turn into noise. It turned into focus. A calm decision settled in. Every future conversation would end in writing, because spoken confusion was the oldest weapon in the building. Sara copied the message links into the notes folder as well. Not screenshots this time. Direct links, because links carried timestamps and authorship. Another screenshot went into notes. At 11:12 a.m., HR sent a message with a smiley face and a promise that everything was fine. A 15-minute chat at 2 o'clock. Short enough to keep balance off. Long enough to place a trap. By 1:40, Sara had a first layer of proof compiled. The deadline had already been missed before Sara's role began. The ticket had been edited late at night. The meeting invite existed before the promotion, and the slide deck had a version mismatch. Sara didn't feel triumphant. Sara felt cold, because this wasn't messy. This was arranged. At 2 o'clock, Sara entered the HR office. The glass was frosted. The air smelled like printer toner and air freshener, and the bowl of mints on the table felt like a performance of comfort. Linda from HR smiled. Jason was already sitting there. Linda slid a document across the table. Performance plan draft. The goals were polished and impossible. Deliver full recovery plan by end of day. Stabilize client satisfaction by Friday. Bring the project to green within 2 weeks. Linda's voice stayed gentle. Acknowledgement is needed by end of day. 5 p.m. Yodi. The office's favorite weapon. A short deadline that turned resistance into attitude. Sara read the page once, then looked up without anger. Clarifying questions. Jason smiled like he had prepared for that. Sure. Sara kept the tone even and clean. Confirmation is needed on scope and the start date of responsibility. Linda blinked. This week, right? Jason answered faster than Linda. Taking point today. Sara nodded. Second, confirmation is needed on whether this plan is based on performance since the start of the role or on project status that predates the role. Jason's smile thinned. Linda glanced toward him for cues. Sara continued. Third, the policy requiring same-day signature without review period. Jason leaned back slightly. Sara, let's keep this simple. The phrase was a fingerprint. Keep it simple meant stop making it measurable. Sara's voice stayed calm. Accuracy is the goal. Scope confirmation in writing is required. No signature today. Jason's eyes flashed. That is difficult. Sara held his gaze. That is precise. Silence made the frosted glass feel thicker. Linda softened again. Support is the goal. Support was a word that could mean anything. Sara did not let it mean guilt. Then the exact scope, timeline, and policy reference can be emailed, Sara said. Review will follow. Sara stood and left without a scene. No slamming door. No raised voice. No emotional mess left for someone else to narrate later. Back at the desk, humiliation tried to rise. Sharp, hot, personal. Sara swallowed it down and chose the only thing that couldn't be twisted: documentation. This was the reset that mattered, the one Sara could feel in the bones. The project didn't need saving as much as Sara's name did. The danger wasn't missing a deadline. The danger was being assigned a past. Teams pinged again. A new name, Rachel Kim. Someone clean was needed. Clean. That was the word that made the trap feel obvious. Sara's reputation was the container. If the mess could be poured into Sara, leadership stayed spotless. Sara answered with a short request for a quick talk. Rachel replied with a location and a time. At 3:15, the back stairwell smelled like concrete and dust. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rachel spoke quietly. This should not be happening. Sara's voice stayed low. Important is enough. Rachel showed an email thread that went back months. Attachments, approvals, and a signature line that didn't belong to Jason. Michael Harrington. The director's name locked the timeline into a shape that finally made sense. Rachel explained in clipped sentences. Contract scope changed quietly. Client noticed later. Leadership scrambled. Nobody wanted a name attached. Sara swallowed once. So a new name was selected. Rachel nodded. Competence made the selection easy. Rachel forwarded the thread and asked for silence. Sara promised it. Walking back to the desk, Sara felt two emotions at once. Vindication, because the instincts had been right. Nausea, because being right didn't erase the attempt. By 4 o'clock, Sara built a sequence. First, locked Jason into the timeline in a way that produced quotable statements. Second, submit an organized packet to compliance with a request to preserve records. Third, avoid emotional outbursts that could be framed as instability. Sara added a fourth step, quietly, preserve access. Sara requested an export of the Jira issue history. Sara saved the slide deck version. Sara copied the team's message links into a dated document. Sara forwarded the HR message thread to a personal archive address used for records, not drama. The choice wasn't emotional. It was tactical. Systems deleted things. People forgot. Screenshots didn't forget. At 5:10, Sara sat in Jason's office, where a hallway window made every expression public. Visibility made people careful. It also made later lies harder. Jason tried to sound relaxed. A lot of questions today. Sara kept the notebook open. Alignment. Jason liked that word. Good. Sara began with dates. Confirmation is needed on when ownership transitioned. Jason shrugged. Last week. Sara wrote it down. Then asked the question that mattered. The missed deadline and escalation shown in the meeting. Were those conditions present before the role began? Jason's face tightened. Live situation. Sara didn't argue. Present before the role began. Jason exhaled. Already trending red. There it was. The admission that broke the narrative. Sara repeated it softly, not as an attack, but as a record. Already trending red before the role began. Jason leaned forward. That isn't what was said. Sara tilted her head slightly. That is what the words mean. Jason accused. Confrontational. Sara answered calm. Documented. Sara asked about the Monday 9 a.m. deadline. Jason waved it away and blamed accounts. Sara wrote that down too. Sara ended the meeting with a simple notice. Recap notes will be sent. Corrections can be provided in writing. Jason's smile vanished. Not necessary. Sara's eyes didn't move. Necessary. Jason tried a final pressure move. No escalation. Sara's voice stayed steady. Preservation. At 5:34, Sara drafted an email with the discipline of an exam answer. Subject. Follow-up notes. Project Willow alignment. It listed the key statements, including already trending red, and attached the screenshot showing Monday's missed deadline, the created date, and the 11:58 p.m. edit. It ended with a single line. Corrections, if needed, should be replied in writing. At 6:12, Sara sent another email. Subject. Request to preserve records, Project Willow. The message wasn't emotional. It was structured. Timeline. Ticket IDs. Version history. The performance plan draft. The recap email. The old thread with the director's signature. Links to team's messages using per client without proof. A note about the meeting invite predating the promotion. The request was simple. Preserve logs and records tied to ownership, SLA changes, and client communications. Then came the automatic response. Case opened. Case number 24-6112. It wasn't justice. It was traction. It was a number that existed outside Jason's voice. The next morning, Sara arrived composed, copper hair down in controlled waves, refusal of smallness made visible. Not for attention, for self-respect. At 9:08, a message hit the account channel. The client had received a blame explanation aimed at Sara. Jason appeared at Sara's desk with a low voice and tight posture. Questions about emails, pressure about image, warnings dressed up as concern. Sara didn't argue about tone. Sara repeated the only thing that mattered. Accountability couldn't be assigned for events that predated the role, and records existed. By Thursday, an 8:30 a.m. leadership meeting appeared on the calendar. The kind of invite that meant containment was failing. In the meeting, Sara stayed quiet at first. Not from fear, strategy. People like Jason thrived on narratives. Executives thrived on closure. Compliance thrived on documentation. Compliance spoke in neutral language. Version histories and communications were reviewed. Then the sentence arrived, clean and devastating. Key scope changes and SLA adjustments occurred prior to Sara Whitmore's assignment as acting lead. And the line that mattered most, this predates a role. Sara felt relief first, then grief. Relief because the lie cracked. Grief because it had ever been attempted. The VP asked why the project had been represented as newly owned by Sara when the risk already existed. Silence spread. Someone tried to say stabilize. The VP's tone sharpened. Stabilize is not scapegoat. A revised root cause summary was issued. External messaging to the client would be corrected. The corporate words were sanitized, but the effect was real. Sara's name was pulled out of the lie. After the meeting, an email arrived. Revised root cause, Project Willow. It stated plainly that the escalation stemmed from scope changes approved months earlier, and that those decisions didn't belong to Sara's current role. Jason's name wasn't in it. Michael's name wasn't in it. Corporate systems rarely published villains, but Sara's name wasn't in it either. At lunch, Sara sat in the cafeteria with food that barely got touched. The adrenaline had faded, and the cost showed up like bruises. The feeling of being used, the sting of knowing competence could attract predators with clean hands. Rachel passed by without stopping. A small nod, a quiet confirmation, then disappearance again. Later that afternoon, HR emailed a new tone. Options moving forward, transfer opportunities, a different environment, a soft apology that would never call itself an apology. Sara stared at the screen while the office moved on as if nothing had happened. Traffic complaints, microwaved leftovers, laughter in the hallway. The room looked the same. Sara didn't. Sara opened the notes folder one more time. Screenshots, case number, recap emails, timeline, proof, links, version history exports. Competence hadn't prevented the attempt. It had made the attempt tempting. But competence, paired with documentation, had made the attempt fail. Sara didn't decide the next move in a dramatic way. There was no speech, no victorious exit, just a quiet choice forming behind steady eyes. Trust had been damaged. A record had been made. A future could be chosen. And if a job ever began again with an impossible deadline, Sara would recognize it for what it was. Not pressure, not chaos, an invitation to carry someone else's shame. Sara would not carry it.